I came home from work with an unpleasant feeling in my stomach. I didn't know why, but I felt that I would find out soon. It was only 5 o'clock on Friday evening. This is unusual for me, as I work for myself and like to spend time alone in the office on Friday nights to make sure everything is in order and ready for the important day on Saturday. My name is Mark Barker, and my business is Barker Autos. I started my working life at the age of 16 as an auto mechanic. At 20, he opened his own auto repair shop, specializing in expensive European cars. Now I am 30, 8 years old. I have 4 points in the district, and I own a business, according to the most conservative estimates, worth $8 million. I was coming home early because my wife, Hannah, said I had to be home early today. She has an important offer. She wants to talk to me about it. Hannah is 30, 5 years old, and we've been married for 14. We met because her father, John, asked me to find her a car for her 20th birthday. A spark immediately passed between us. The day she picked up the car, she asked me out on a date. A year later, we got married, and now we have 2 boys. James, 12 years old, and Martin, 10. Hannah's father, John, is an accountant, but a very nice person. He is a partner in an accounting office and helps me a lot in business, giving me a lot of time. Hannah's mom, Stephanie, calls me a fat monkey and makes it clear that she thinks her daughter could claim more than me. Hannah has an older brother, Alexander. Everyone calls him Alex, and a younger sister, Susan. Alex never got married, and it's clear that he's not going to do it. Susan is married to a lawyer named Barclay. He imagines himself to be a kind of shark, but in fact, he earns a living as a trial lawyer. Hannah's mother considers him the best son-in-law in the world. Something happened to Susan in her early teens. I never found out what exactly, but she had to have surgery, as a result of which she was unable to have children. As a result, our 2 boys turned out to be the only grandchildren. Stephanie seems annoyed by this, but Susan has fallen into depression because her mother only talks about children. Hannah is worried about her sister. At one of the family meetings, I suggested they adopt a child, but Stephanie exploded, saying she wanted her grandchildren to be biologically hers. John's next suggestion was surrogacy. Susan asked how it could be done, and I explained about IVF as best I could. Stephanie wrinkled her nose again, saying it was too complicated, and asked who would be the egg donor. Later that evening, Hannah and I discussed Susan's problem. I offered her to donate her eggs for IVF. Hannah asked how it would happen, and I replied that I would study the question. It turned out that it was not so difficult to take eggs, and I brought this information home. This way, Stephanie will be able to get her biological children, and everything in the world will be fine. This conversation took place about 3 months ago, and since then, this topic has come up as if by chance about every 2 or 3 weeks. The reason why I had an unpleasant feeling in my stomach is that for the last week or 10 days, Hannah has been a little out of her mind. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but she was texting someone. Usually, she is completely open with her phone, but in this case, she was secretive. Besides, we haven't had privacy for over a week. The house is not visible from the road, so when I turned to it, I saw only a few parked cars and realized that my bad premonitions were justified when I saw John and Stephanie's car, Susan and Barclay's car, and several other people I knew as more distant relatives. I felt like a whole bunch of trouble was coming at me, and they were going to pretend that everything was fine. I parked at the house and went inside, prepared for the upcoming storm. I deliberately entered through the garage door, knowing that I would not be heard. I stood in the utility room and listened, but only muffled voices reached me. I always carry a dictaphone in my pocket. John taught me this when I went to a meeting to make my notes at the end of it. Out of habit, I turned on the recorder and put it back in my pocket, being sure that it would capture most of the conversation that I understood was going to take place. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and entered the kitchen. 8 people were sitting in the corner next to the kitchen. Hannah, John, and Stephanie are sitting on a 3-seater sofa. Susan and Barclay are on a double. Alex is on a single, and Joan and Karen, 2 aunts, are on chairs brought from the dining room. Only the chair that had been moved from my home office remained empty. It was placed so that Alex and 2 aunts surrounded it, and it was directly opposite Hannah, John, and Stephanie. Clearly a prepared ambush. When I closed the door behind me, Hannah said, "Come in, Mark, and sit down. We're just discussing a couple of things and would like to hear your opinion." I thought, we would like to hear your opinion, so now they will offer me something, and I, as expected, will have no choice. I went to the corner, but turned around one of the stools from the bar and sat down on it. I wanted the atmosphere in the room to change, and sitting on a high stool, I not only separate myself from everyone else, but also become taller. That is, they will have to look up at me. I didn't say anything, but I looked Hannah straight in the eye, and my face showed a lot of irritation. She blushed when she realized what I was doing, but she couldn't hold my gaze. I slowly looked around the room. John and Alex weren't looking at me. Stephanie had an expression of triumph on her face, as if she was about to reach her cherished goal. Barclay looked into my eyes and grinned, as if he was going to get the better of me, and a smile appeared on Susan's face, which had not been there for a long time. Hannah sat in silence, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't do it. Looking around the room, I continued to look at her, and she tried in every possible way to avoid my gaze. I thought, I can wait as long as you can, and was silent. It turned into a battle, and she started getting mad at me. In the end, Stephanie broke the silence by saying, "We've been discussing Susan's problem, and it seems we found a solution." I didn't say anything to Stephanie and kept looking at Hannah, who was now fidgeting under my gaze. Eventually, Hannah looked up at me. "Mark, as you know, Susan can't have children, and you have studied the possibility of surrogacy, and we think it is a good option. Mom wants the eggs to biologically belong to the family. So over the past few weeks, we have been discussing the option in which I will be the surrogate mother." I raised my hand to stop her. "Have you discussed this over the past few weeks? And why did they consider it necessary to exclude me from these discussions? Obviously, this decision will have a serious impact on me and the boys. And I think we should have been aware of all this." Stephanie cut in. "What do you mean? It has nothing to do with you. Just hold her hand and smile." I took a deep breath and turned to Stephanie without taking my eyes off Hannah. "Naturally, it will affect me and the boys. Their mother will be in an IVF clinic. Then she will carry the baby, which means that she will not be able to do some things for them. Both previous pregnancies were difficult for her, and both times she was hospitalized for a month with high blood pressure. She will have to undergo an examination and spend time in the hospital during childbirth, which will erase her from their lives. She will also need time to recover. You need to have a certain degree of selfishness not to understand how destructive this will be for my family." I was most worried when, at my words, "IVF clinic," Hannah's gaze slid around the room. A grin appeared on Barclay's face, and Susan shuddered. What am I missing? Stephanie obviously enjoyed bringing me up to speed. There will be no IVF clinic. My grandson will be conceived in love and passion, not in a test tube. A light bulb flashed. This is an ambush, and the others are here to keep me under control. I felt anger flare up on my face and shouted, "Hannah, explain everything now." She darted her gaze to me, and I saw fear in her eyes. The conversation didn't go the way she had planned, and now the truth has been revealed, and she has lost control of the conversation. She said, "IVF is not the best option. 2 months ago, I stopped taking pills. The doctors say that in about 2 to 3 weeks, I will become fertile. During my fertility, Barclay will move in with me for a week, and at the end of the week, I should already be pregnant. And after that, Susan and Barclay will be able to adopt a child who will be biologically native to both of them. By this time, I was standing right in front of Hannah and felt Alex's hand on my shoulder. I tried to pull away, but he held my shoulder very tightly. I heard his words. "Hold on, Mark. Please don't do anything stupid." I stood up straight and, addressing no one, said, "Don't do anything stupid." Now I turned to everyone and said, "Get out of my house." Stephanie tried to insist on her own. "No, we have to make an agreement and decide if you will stay in the house when it happens." John was already up and trying to get his wife up from her seat when I said, "John, I've never hit a woman before, but if your wife doesn't get out of this house in 10 seconds, God knows, I'll hit her." At that moment, Stephanie looked into my eyes and for the first time realized the truth of my words. She jumped up and asked, "Hannah, don't you need Alex to stay for protection?" I laughed. "If you think I'm going to physically harm my wife, you don't know me. If you think that this nonsense will end well for our marriage, then you really don't know me at all." Hannah gasped and then said, "Mom, please go away. Everyone else leave. Mark and I have a lot to discuss." When everyone left the house, I went to my office, locking the door. First of all, I unloaded the conversation that had just taken place. Then I rebooted the recorder. While doing this, Hannah screamed, "Mark, I've never seen you behave so rudely with anyone. You should come out here and discuss everything like an adult." Good God, she's throwing all this nonsense at me and she's mad at me for being mad, I thought to myself. I laughed, but said nothing. At work, I have a system for recording all phone calls and messages. They are fixed as part of our CRM system and have saved us more than once when we billed for extra work. Hannah's phone was an office phone, so all her messages were recorded, although they were stored in the trash folder. I quickly accessed her recordings and downloaded all the voice calls and messages between her mom, Susan, and Barclay. In fact, everything turned out to be simple. They created a band called Baby. It included Hannah, Susan, Barclay, and Stephanie. Slowly, I looked through the messages in the group. The discussion started 3 months ago, right after the day when surrogacy was mentioned. It all started with the fact that Hannah offered to donate eggs for a surrogate mother, and then it turned into the fact that she herself would become a surrogate mother. Stephanie played a key role in how conception would take place, and Barclay readily made suggestions. Stephanie only talked about the fact that the child should be conceived in passion. She had some kind of irrational opinion that a child conceived in a test tube would not have sufficient emotional maturity. It took me about an hour to gather my thoughts, and I also took this opportunity to contact my lawyer and ask him for a referral to a divorce lawyer. After leaving the office, I found Hannah sitting in a corner and sipping a glass of wine. The first outburst of anger had passed, but her face was still filled with rage. I looked at her. "Did you really think I would swallow this sudden nonsense?" Her anger flared up again as she replied, "What do you mean, nonsense? We agreed on how to help my sister get out of depression, and you're acting like a spoiled child, literally throwing my family out of my house." I just laughed. "You want to commit adultery under the guise of allegedly providing your sister with a child, and you are angry at me for refusing you. Hannah, go and think about what you're offering. And remember that this is also my house, and anyone who disrespects me in it will experience all my anger." The word divorce knocked the wind out of her sails, but she recovered and said, "If you divorce me, I will leave you without pants, paying alimony for children and spouse. And I will also get half of the business, which I will sell to anyone who buys it. I started laughing again. She really is noticeably stupid, and answered, I hope you haven't heard enough of Barclay's advice. Not only are these tips bad, but also his advice will lead to the fact that I will take away his license as the beneficiary of your actions. But let me explain that not only this house, but also the land on which it stands, got to me before we got married. This is not marital property. We both signed a marriage contract. You have no claims to my business, and I have no claims to the business that you and your father jointly run. If you plan to get pregnant, especially from a man other than your husband, your medical history will show that you will not be able to take care of the children. Don't forget that during both pregnancies, you were hospitalized with blood pressure problems. Hannah, if you want a dirty fight, I'll give it to you. You won't get pregnant with Barclay's baby if you plan to stay married to me. And I won't agree to Ive because I don't trust you anymore. You've made it so that either you win or you lose. And the win is our marriage. And now, where are the kids? I want to see them. She realized that I had stopped the discussion and she would have to back off. She said, They're at the Pattersons at number 30, and I'm coming for them now. Please cook dinner. I left a couple of pizzas in the fridge. I warmed up the pizza, then played with the boys in the garden until it was time to go to bed. I knew I needed to talk to Hannah, but I just couldn't stand this conversation. Both boys went to bed at 9:30 in the evening as I exhausted both them and myself playing football in the garden. Finally, I got to the point where I couldn't hold back any longer, went to the refrigerator for a beer, and went to the corner where Hannah was sitting on the only chair. He sat down opposite her on the 3-seater sofa, took a long sip of beer, and said, Did you really believe that I would agree to you betraying me and having a baby for Susan? Not only that, you expected me to clear my own bed. I don't think you understand what disrespect and humiliation you were going to bring down on me. I noticed Hannah's sad expression when she said, I have to do something for Susan. My sister is completely depressed. My mother hates If, and Barclay says they can't afford it anyway. If you don't let me, I'm afraid Susan will hurt herself, and I'll never forgive myself if she does. So this is a big performance, in fact, blackmail. I poured myself another drink and replied, By cuckolding me, you're making a deer out of me, so there's no way you and Barclay can arrange this to get pregnant. If they can't afford a F, we'll give them money, or we can go 50. 50 with your parents. If your mom doesn't like it, then that's her problem. To be clear, I have already asked the company's lawyer for a referral to a divorce lawyer. I'm serious. You do this and we'll break up. And don't blame the expenses on me. I won't stay married to a traitor, and if you do that, you will become one. She ran out of the room crying, and I heard the bedroom door slam shut. I don't know if she locked it, but I decided that I wouldn't sleep next to her that night. The idea that she might try to convince me with intimacy was disgusting, and I wanted her to know how she would feel without me. I went into the office, locked the door again, and looked through her message log again. It turned out that they were exchanging text messages in a group. Susan is clearly upset, says that this is her only hope, and she does not know what she will do if she does not have a child in her arms. Hannah started by saying that she would work on me. I checked my email, and Tony, the company's lawyer, answered my letter. The letter said that a lawyer would write to me with his demands. He wrote, and we discussed everything. Then I closed the computer, pulled the sofa bed apart, and went to bed. I woke up from the fact that someone was trying to open the door to the office. Then I heard a knock and a half, scream from Hannah. Mark, what are you doing? Why didn't you come to bed? I got up and looked at my watch. It was 3:30 in the morning. Unlocking and opening the door, I found Hannah standing in the hallway in her dressing gown. It was half open, and it was clear that there was nothing under it. I looked at her in silence. "What's the problem?" She replied, "I've been waiting for you in bed. I thought we could at least hug and use the opportunity to talk calmly and figure out how I can assure you that your jealousy is groundless." Obviously, there were more messages in the group. I didn't want to reveal that I had access, so I left it as it is. "Good night, Hannah. Go to bed and take this opportunity to think about the damage you're doing to our marriage, how you're neglecting my feelings and self-esteem." I closed and locked the door. He turned off the light but remained standing to the side of the door, listening. There was light coming from under the door, and I knew Hannah was still there. I thought I heard a sigh, and then the light went out. The next day was Saturday. I usually left later on Saturday, but I left early today. I assumed Hannah would change course. Last night was her usual tactic. She could have gone one of two ways. Or she became very nice, showing me how good a wife and mother she was and remains, hoping that I would not notice her infidelity. Or she became a hellish woman, trying to show that if I didn't give in to her, she would turn my life into a continuous suffering. I assumed that today would be the first, and after that, I would take the opposite approach. I stayed in the office until 4:30 after everyone had left. I just couldn't bring myself to go home. I realized that our marriage is like a mirror, and Hannah threw a very large brick at it. The mirror is cracked, and now it will always be cracked. I began to think that our marriage was doomed, no matter what Hannah did next. I dragged myself home by 5 o'clock. Of course, Hannah was in the kitchen, the sundress clinging to her figure. The makeup was flawless. Normally, I would have practically attacked her in the kitchen, but this time I didn't even pay attention. I went into the spare room to change. After about 20 minutes, she called up the stairs. "Mark, dinner's ready." I had to give the boys a good show, but I wanted to make sure that Hannah understood that this image of her as a loving wife would not change my decision. When I went to sit down, a glass of red wine was set up for Hannah and me. Then she came to the table carrying a plate with steak, a large portion of English potatoes and mushrooms. My favorite Saturday dinner. Nothing surprising. I paid almost no attention to Hannah, talking to the boys about everything she couldn't talk about. She tried to change the subject, but I wouldn't let her. The boys didn't notice it, but she did. After the meal, she said, "Mark, help me wash the dishes, and the boys will go play a little." I got up and started clearing the table, but Hannah stayed seated. When she heard that the boys were playing console, she said, "Mark, sit down and talk to me. What's the matter?" I went back to the table and sat down. Then he said, "Can you really ask that with a straight face? If you don't know what's going on, then this marriage has even bigger problems than I thought. Let me explain it to you. You're planning to betray me with clear intention of getting pregnant by someone else. You also understand that I'm not buying it, and that's why you're putting on a loving wife show for me, trying to pretend that if I let you do this, then you'll be the best wife and mother a man can dream of. But it won't help, Hannah. If you do, you will never be a good wife again. To be clear, I've already contacted a divorce lawyer and will terminate our marriage if you do." Her expression changed from a smiling, loving wife to a bitch. Her voice was half a whisper, but there was anger in it. She hissed. Let me clarify the situation. I decided to do this for my sister. If you can't accept it, then divorce me. It sounded like a threat. I think she thought I was bluffing. I took a deep breath and said, "Today, I was sitting in the office and thinking about what a good marriage is. Marriage is like a mirror, and now you're throwing stones at our mirror. The problem is that our mirror is broken, and no matter how hard we try to put it back together, it will always be in cracks. I have a terrible premonition that our marriage is now having a crack, and in the end, like a broken mirror, it will collapse." I'm not kidding. It's not something I can put up with. You choose them, not me and the boys. You have a very short time to show that the most important thing in your life is us. If you don't, then, well, there's nothing left for you and me. I got up from the table and went to the boys' room. We played shooters all night. I had a clear feeling that our family was breaking up, and I was very sad. The next few weeks passed in the same mode. Hannah tried her best to be the perfect wife. Every time she tried to talk about the baby, I told her the same thing, that this was a reason to break off the relationship. She stopped being so toxic, but switched to trust me, Mark. One evening, Susan came to dinner with us. After we finished, Hannah invited me to join them in a corner. Susan started the conversation. Mark, my life will not be complete without a child. I really need him, and what Hannah is ready to do is the biggest gift that can only be given to me. Can't you open your heart to me? I looked at Hannah to make sure she understood that I could see this ambush from a mile away. And then I said, Susan, there are several ways to achieve this. Turning Hannah into your personal fallen woman is not one of them. Now I was looking directly at Susan, but I heard Hannah's sharp sigh and continued. Maybe life has treated you unfairly, but I am absolutely serious. If you continue on this path, our marriage with Hannah is over. Are you willing to sacrifice this for your own personal reason? There are other issues that no one has even mentioned. What happens if Barclay can't finish the job the first time? Will it become monthly until she gets pregnant? It took us 9 months trying to get pregnant with James and 5 months with Martin. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Hannah was looking away. Obviously, she hoped I hadn't thought of that. Then I asked, and will one child be enough? Or you decide that an only child is... Susan's face turned red, and Hannah started picking at her nails. I looked around and said to Hannah, so, you've been thinking about this and you're not going to make it a one-time event. God, you are so devious. I have no doubt that you are imitating your mother. I got up, and Susan and Hannah got up with me. Susan was crying, but Hannah's mask fell off again, and she was angry, saying, Mark, I never thought you'd be so uncooperative. We have given you every opportunity to resolve this issue intelligently, but you refuse. I'm going to Susan and Barclay's on Friday night, and I'll be there for a week. Deal with it. I just said, well, don't bother coming back here. You'll be served at their house on Friday, and your things will be in the garage. When I left the kitchen to go to my room, I sent Liam a text message. She goes ahead. They start this Friday. Liam called me and after a quick hello asked, do you know what their plan is? Judging by what I've just been told, she's going to their house on Friday after work and plans to stay there for the weekend and the whole of next week. All right, he said. We have to serve her on Friday when she leaves work. It will give her time to change her mind, and it will look good for the judge. Until Thursday evening, the house was like an icebox. When the boys went to bed, she tried to snuggle up to me, but I didn't hug her, even when she tried to lift my hand and put it on herself. In the end, she said, Mark, it's just 1 week of our lives. How can it change anything? I pulled away from her and stood up. Then he said, Hannah, this is going to change everything. You're leaving me for another man. When you come back, you won't be a faithful wife. I'll never be able to touch you without thinking about it. If you really think that this is just a week of our life, then you really ignored me at every stage of planning. If you go to their house tomorrow, we're finished. Hannah looked sad, but did her best to keep eye contact with me, and I tried to keep eye contact with her. She said, Mark, I'm not leaving you for anyone. All I'm going to do is carry baby for my sister. I took a deep breath. You really don't understand, do you? You're leaving me. You put their desires and interests above mine and the boys. You leave us for a week and you don't care what we do, what I tell the boys, or even worse, what happens when their friends find out what you did. And if you don't get pregnant this month, you'll do it every month until you get pregnant. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. And if you decide to continue, you will at least realize that what happens next inevitably depends on your actions. Hannah was sitting with her mouth open when I left the room. Going up the stairs, I heard her running after me. I went into my room and locked the door. A few seconds after I locked the door, I heard her knock and say, "What do you mean by what will happen next is inevitable? What are you planning?" I opened the door. "I've already told you that. You need to think carefully and decide on priorities." Then I closed the door again. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I was already in bed and sleeping more soundly than ever since all this mess began. I did everything I could. Further actions depend on her. The next morning, I decided not to leave for work early. When I was preparing breakfast for the boys, Hannah came into the kitchen with a travel bag. She looked at me with some concern on her face, then turned around and put the bag in the laundry room, where I couldn't see her. I went back to making breakfast for the boys and said, "I see that you have made your choice." I heard her go to the closet to get something for herself. "I thought you'd be gone." I was standing with my back to her. "I thought we should eat together for the last time, even so." She stopped moving, but I knew she caught my thought when she said, "What do you mean by eat one last time?" These are a couple of mysterious words that you told me recently. "There's nothing mysterious about them, Hannah," I said. "I made it clear what would happen if you continued down this path. You just decided to ignore my exceptionally clear warnings." She turned to me, and I turned to her. For the first time since this mess began, she realized that I was serious. There was concern written on her face as she said, "Now I can't refuse. I'm afraid for Susan's mental health if I do this." I shrugged my shoulders. Our family has long been the second most important. Then shouted, "Boys, breakfast is ready." I took the keys and said, "See you later," and walked past her to the door. She grabbed my hand. "Didn't even kiss you good. Bye?" To which I replied, "No, thanks. I don't want to take anything away from Barclay." I pulled my hand out of hers before she could move and walk to the door. When the door closed, I heard her crying, "Mark, please. I need you to be there for me when I do this." Throughout the day, Hannah and Susan called me repeatedly. Even Stephanie called, but I didn't answer any of those calls. At 4 o'clock, my secretary called me and said that John was on the line. I said, "Connect me," and waited. "Hello, Mark. I know it's a shitty show, but it's turned into a battle of wills. Hannah thought you'd agree, but you fought it every step of the way. Now she thinks that if she backs down, she will feel like a loser. What can be done to fix this?" I took a very deep breath. "I'm sorry, John, but there's nothing we can do to fix this. If I let this happen, I will lose my self-respect. I will never be able to look at myself in the mirror, and I will never be able to touch Hannah again. Hannah created this situation herself. If she had thought about it a little, she would have realized that I would never allow this to happen in my life. To be honest, I think our marriage has been irretrievably destroyed, and your assessment of her unwillingness to retreat only confirms this. I'm sorry, John, but either she's coming home tonight or it's over between us." After which he said, "Hannah says you said you were going to divorce her. Is that right?" "Yes, John," I said. "If she keeps this up, I'll divorce her. The documents have already been prepared, and if she goes for it, she will be served." John took a deep breath and asked, "Will you fulfill the marriage contract?" "I'm glad you remembered that, because Hannah forgot. Yes, I will, because I want to protect my business, and the house was mine before marriage. I'll be fair to her, but not overly generous, I said. There was silence for a few seconds until John said, I'd probably do the same if I were you. I warned Stephanie not to go down this path, but she said that in your relationship with Hannah, you jumped over your head, and you will let her do it, just not to lose your social status. I know you much better, and I should have insisted. We ended the conversation by thanking each other. I suspect that the next conversation with John or the rest of the family will not be so friendly. I decided to come home early. The boys are staying with Mrs. Neal, our neighbor, and I need to get into a new rhythm of life because their lives should be turned upside down when the phone rang. It was John again. He just said, Mark, today she was filed for divorce. Yes, John, I told you what I was going to do. Now she knows how serious I am. Now it's time for her to make a decision. Me and the boys are Susan and Barclay. There was silence for a few seconds. Then John said, She's in shock. Stephanie is ready to tear you to pieces, and Susan has fallen into such a deep depression that we can't even reach her. You really turned this family inside out. I replied, I'm sorry, John, but now you know how I've been feeling for the last 3 weeks. It's not my fault, but I have no choice. Tell Hannah that her actions will give me the answer. If he comes home, we can talk. And if not, then I will understand that I am only in second place. With that, I hung up the phone. I didn't need John's answer. I went home, picked up the boys, and ordered pizza for dinner. If Hannah comes home, it will be a war zone. We had already eaten, and I turned on the dishwasher when I heard the sound of a car approaching. I looked out and saw John, Stephanie, and Hannah getting out of the car. I told the boys to go to their rooms and play on computers, and I went to the room. Now I hated this room because so many bad things had happened in it lately. Stephanie was the first to burst through the door, followed closely by John. There was fury on her face, but John grabbed her. Stephanie, we're here to help, not make things worse. You should let Mark and Hannah talk. Stephanie spun on her heels. How could it be even worse? This simple man prevents our daughter from giving us grandchildren. I won't put up with it. I saw the look on John's face and suspected that Stephanie, even in her anger, had caught the same look and had the sense to keep quiet. Hannah was walking behind, as if to the gallows. She was holding a brown envelope in her hand. She was crying. It was obvious. She sat down on the sofa, looking at me sitting in the only chair. John sat Stephanie down at the kitchen table and then put the coffee on. Hannah looked at me with her red eyes. Is this your last word on this issue? I answered briefly. Yes. Hannah suggested, is there really no opportunity for negotiations? And again, I answered with one word. No. I talked to my sister and mom. And what about Ivy? Hannah asked. I was so disgusted by the way I was treated that I even felt sick at her question, so I wasn't going to feel much compassion for any of them. Hannah, I already said this 3 weeks ago, but you just wanted to do it your way. I don't think I can trust you that you won't slip away and betray me behind my back. So it's too little and too late. You can donate eggs and hire a surrogate mother. I'll even pay for it. But you have treated me so disrespectfully that I will not agree to you carrying a child. I saw Stephanie start to boil again, but John put his hand on her shoulder. Stephanie, you don't have to get involved in this. It's our own fault. Hannah and Mark have to figure it out for themselves. Hannah was crying quietly. I didn't want to be the bad guy in this situation, but it was clear that everyone was going to make me look like that. Hannah looked up. I don't want to get a divorce. I need you. How do we fix it? I took a deep breath. To be honest, so much water has already flowed under this bridge that I don't know if we can. But let's try. The first thing to do is to put an end to this whole sentence. If you want to continue acting as Susan's surrogate mother, I will continue the divorce. Next, we need to rebuild our marriage. I gave you the opportunity to be yourself, but you seem to take it as something that I would agree with whatever you did. A wife who respects her husband as an equal would never offer what you are offering. So we need to think about how to fix a broken mirror. The use of the phrase broken mirror made her jump. You've said that before. He said that a broken mirror can be repaired, but there will always be a crack visible in it. Is our marriage going to be like this? I looked into her eye and said, I'm afraid so. By this point, Stephanie was beside herself with indignation. She stated, What about poor Susan? You're robbing her of her only hope for a child. Without taking my eyes off Hannah, I said, Hannah, you can collect your eggs. At the clinic, they will be fertilized with Barclay's material in a test tube and implanted into a surrogate mother. They have such a service. But Hannah, as soon as your eggs are taken, I expect that your tubes will be tied. A few years ago, we decided that we wouldn't have any more children. But Hannah said she didn't want to be sterilized. She took pills to eliminate the possibility of accidents. When I mentioned the tubal ligation, she turned pale. Please don't make me do this. I just shook my head. You really don't understand what's going on. You were ready to play games with your body. The only way I can guarantee that you won't do it again is to take your body out of the equation. It means making sure that you can't get pregnant the good old way. I'm sorry, Hannah, but when you play with fire, you can get burned. I don't know if Hannah was devastated or furious. She was crying when Stephanie spoke again. You're really heartless. I turned around and said, I've learned from the best Stephanie. Hannah has agreed to be sterilized if I stop the divorce. We agreed that I would suspend the divorce and terminate it the day she went to the hospital for sterilization. A month later, we were sitting in an IVF clinic. The clinic helped Sarah and Barclay find a surrogate mother, and John and I paid her $10,000 each. The procedure for taking eggs was simple, but left Hannah with a slight pain. A week later, Hannah went to the hospital to be sterilized, and I went to the judge to withdraw the application for divorce, which he granted without question. Life seemed to go on normally, but our once very active life came to naught, and we regularly sat in different chairs at the TV in the evenings, and we had nothing to say to each other. The surrogate mother was planted with 2 viable eggs about a month after the collection. Unfortunately, in the 3rd month, she lost the fetus. No other eggs were viable, and Hannah could no longer provide them. Hannah stopped hosting family events at our house, and I happily avoided events elsewhere. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that we are actually 2 people raising children who have a piece of paper saying that we are married, but there is no real relationship. Everything I predicted has come true. Hannah proposed a hopeless situation, and such an outcome was inevitable. The loser, Hannah, could not tolerate the winner, me. This went on for 10 years. We did everything for the children, sports, events, whatever you call it. I was there, and Hannah was always with me. All the parents were jealous of us, but at home we had a different life. Of course, we shared a bed, but there was no intimacy.